Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are opening a vast stack of sources that chronicles not just criminal history, but the actual construction of a shadow government.
It's really about a powerful, wealthy entity that operated for decades, pretty much in plain sight. It successfully bridged that gap between, the gutter and the boardroom.
Exactly. So we're undertaking a deep dive into the history and really the financial evolution of the Chicago outfit.
And this history, it offers a unique and frankly a pretty disturbing lens on 20th century America. The source material we're looking at, it doesn't just detail thugs and speakeasies.
No, it's much more than that.
It tracks a corporate evolution. I mean, how an organization learned to monetize American hypocrisy, starting with illicit booze and then transitioning to controlling national labor unions.
And eventually reaching deep into the highest levels of U.S. politics, Hollywood, and Las Vegas. It's the story of organized crime, learning how to be truly organized.
And ruthlessly strategic. Yeah.
Our mission today is to follow that money and that influence across, 8 decades? We've got sources here that provide some incredible contrasts in the historical narrative. I mean, think about the year 1959. You have these massive cultural tectonic plates shifting. A 20-year-old John Lennon is in Liverpool performing in an illegal strip joint, foreshadowing the whole British invasion.
Right.
You've got political upheavals in the Caribbean with Fidel Castro nationalizing U.S.-owned oil refineries in Cuba.
And meanwhile, back in Chicago.
Exactly. Meanwhile, at 915 Franklin Avenue, Chicago, a meeting was underway, a conference of powerful men that would, by their own mutual decree, never be chronicled in the history books.
That was the outfit.
That was the outfit.
Okay.
So we are going to unearth exactly what they were building while the rest of the world looked elsewhere and how they laid the foundation for that secretive meeting.
To really understand the outfit's eventual triumph and its corporate longevity, you first have to understand the environment that created it. Chicago was the perfect primordial soup for organized crime.
It was structured for lawlessness.
Long before Prohibition gave them their first massive windfall. Yes.
Okay, let's unpack that. What specific conditions made Chicago so inherently set up for this kind of organized lawlessness geographically and socially?
Well, we can start right with the identity of the city itself. Chicago, the name, comes from the Ojibwa word shikagu.
Which means?
It means wild onion. It's a foul-smelling, river-clogging plant. So from the start, it was always a rough-and-tumble place.
The smelly onion.
Geographically, it was the gateway to the Wild West. So you had this clash, you had Eastern urbanity with its massive wealth and dense immigrant populations, meeting the rugged, take the law into your own hands mentality of the American frontier.
So that clash guaranteed a steady stream of tourist business and cash and, I assume, a huge clientele for every possible vice.
Exactly. And then there's the actual physical construction of the city. This is what created a literal underworld for crime to flourish in.
This part of the story is just incredible.
It really is. Chicago was notoriously built on a smelly swamp, a marsh. So by the late 1850s, the mud problem was so bad that the city fathers came up with this ingenious, Herculean plan.
Well, they did.
They jacked up the entire city, the buildings, the wooden streets, everything. 10 feet, sometimes 12 feet into the air.
The whole city. On stilts?
For a decade, yeah. It existed on stilts, and that created this massive, cavernous space underneath the raised streets. That space became known simply as the Underworld.
So crime had a literal, sheltered, physical base of operations. A dungeon below the legitimate city. The imagery is incredible.
It is. And this newly created dungeon-like world, it immediately sheltered a repellent assemblage of humanity. This space was initially commanded by Chicago's first criminal empire czar, a man named Roger Plant.
And the sources say the most loathsome crimes of this time were those against women, what was chillingly called white slavery.
Yes. Give us the specific details from the sources, the brutality and the economics of that system before the outfit even existed.
The so-called ropers, the recruiters, would lure desperate 14 and 15-year-old girls to Chicago with promises of factory work, big paydays. But upon arrival, they were immediately raped, terrorized into submission, and then kept compliant and quiet with forced doses of opium.
That's horrifying.
They were forced into prostitution. A trick often cost $10, and the owner took a horrifying 60 to 90% of the earnings.
Almost 60 to 90%.
The sources paint a grim picture. When the girls' looks or health deteriorated, they were just tossed out to die from drug overdoses or exposure.
And this all flourished because policing was, what, almost non-existent?
Pretty much. In 1850, you have a population of 80,000 people. And there were only 9 city watch marshals assigned to keep order.
9 marshals for 80,000 people.
That context is vital, isn't it? It completely reframes the narrative. Organized vice, graft, corruption, it was all baked into the infrastructure of Chicago long before the Italian-American community rose to power.
And that leads directly to the second critical element, the fierce prejudice that met Italian immigrants. The community was often considered less than white by the established Northern Europeans. Their experience closely mirrored the profound societal racism that African Americans faced.
The discrimination was constant.
Harsh and constant. One source cites the Washington Post justifying the prejudice, claiming Italians seldom learn to speak our tongue, they have no respect for our laws or our form of government, they are always foreigners.
So they faced an incredibly high barrier to entry into legitimate society.
They did. Their entry into the U.S. was profoundly tough, especially for those from southern Italy who made up the bulk of the early arrivals. You're talking about a massive illiteracy rate, 57.3%, which was nearly triple that of other arrivals.
And that illiteracy, plus the discrimination, forced them into the worst jobs.
The most undesirable jobs, yeah. Rag picker, ditch digger, chimney sweep. In the South, Italian labor was actually considered a God-sent solution to replace recently freed slaves. They'd work for exceptionally low wages and were initially overjoyed to be able to make the little money paid them.
The sources mention a horrific event that really underscores how volatile this environment was for them: the New Orleans mass lynching.
Yes, the worst mass lynching in U.S. history, March 14th, 1891. 11 innocent Italian men were brutally murdered in New Orleans, all due to pure hysteria and anti-immigrant sentiment.
But out of that tragedy comes a key figure in the outfit's legal future, almost a legendary figure.
Joseph Bulger. His original name was Imbrugio. He was a young son of one of the victims, rescued by a Cajun woman and taken to safety upriver to Chicago.
And he becomes a central player in the outfit's legal affairs later on.
He did. Bulger was galvanized by the injustice his family faced. He goes on to graduate law school at the remarkably young age of 20 and becomes a crucial legal advisor, or consigliere, for the rising Chicago crime empire. His entire professional life was shaped by this institutional prejudice.
So even their first major legal advisor, the man helping them bridge the gap between the underworld and the legal system, was forged in the fire of anti-Italian prejudice.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is that the actual statistical findings at the time contradicted the prejudice. The Wickersham Commission, which investigated the New Orleans violence, found that Italians were charged with only 4 of the 543 homicides committed there between 1925 and 1929.
So the perception of the lawless Italian was, according to the official study, completely disproportionate.
Completely. Hardly justifiable. They were marginalized, but their strong family ties often kept them out of certain vice trades, like prostitution and white slavery, where you'd find poor girls of almost every other nationality. This deep well of discrimination, ironically, became the backdrop against which they organized for mutual protection and, ultimately, for power.
Which fundamentally changes the timeline we usually hear. They didn't invent Chicago vice. They eventually took it over, often in response to societal rejection.
And nothing fueled that takeover and provided the necessary capital, like the sudden, massive policy failure that was Prohibition.
It was, without question, the single most lucrative policy failure in American history for these organizations. It just gave them a cash engine beyond their wildest dreams.
That ill-conceived constitutional amendment and the subsequent enforcement law, the Volstead Act, banning the production and sale of beer and alcohol, it created a quick, easy route to extravagant wealth.
It was the Puritan dream's last stand, wasn't it? Trying to install a theocracy, but instead it just gifted Chicago's gangs a secure foothold on America's economic infrastructure.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the roots of the temperance movement trace back over a century, long before the outfit existed. By the 1820s, you had thousands of these societies arising, often spearheaded by the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU.
Right, formed in 1874. Their members were grappling with the devastating effects of liquor addiction on their families, their saloon-frequenting husbands.
But the real political muscle, the engine that pushed this past state bans and into a constitutional amendment, came from the Anti-Saloon League, guided by a political master named Wayne Wheeler.
Wheeler was an absolute political genius. He's really the blueprint for the modern political lobbyist.
A brilliant debater. He moved to Washington in 1913, aiming for a total ban. And here's where his strategic mind showed its true colors. Wheeler realized he could parlay anti-German fanaticism into federal legislation during World War I.
So Prohibition became a code word for patriotism during WWI. How did he pull off that political alchemy?
Exactly. Wheeler, without a shred of evidence or data, persuaded legislators that German-American breweries were in league with the German government.
So drinking beer was funding the Kaiser.
That was the argument. He also decried the waste of grain used in brewing that could otherwise support the war effort. It was an appeal to nativism and emergency wartime patriotism. And that led directly to the wholesale ban on grain sales for alcohol production and the closure of distilleries. A political masterstroke wrapped in morality.
And to achieve the passage of a constitutional amendment, which is one of the most difficult political tasks in the entire document, he needed massive financial backing.
The support was unprecedented. The titans of industry, the robber barons, they all bankrolled the crusade. We're talking about the Rockefellers, the DuPonts, and notably Henry Ford.
Ford was an ardent temperance fanatic.
Right, and he was convinced that if his massive number of employees weren't spending their meager incomes on saloon visits and booze, they would buy his Model Ts instead.
So this blend of Puritanism, wartime hysteria, and naked corporate self-interest created the perfect storm that birthed the 18th Amendment.
And the immediate outcome for the underworld was spectacular. Guaranteed profit with minimal overhead.
The economics were irresistible. I mean, that's why enforcement was doomed from the start.
It cost just $5 to produce 1 barrel of beer that could be retailed illegally for a minimum of $55.
And hard liquor profits were even higher.
Oh, much higher. Markups often exceeding 1,000%. There's an incredible example of George Remus, a Cincinnati lawyer turned bootlegger, who earned a staggering $40 million in just 3 years.
$40 million.
Yeah.
That's a monumental fortune for the time. It just shows the scale of the money that was suddenly flowing into illicit hands.
And Chicago embraced this new illicit industry with open arms. Non-compliance was massive and immediate.
Speakeasies popped up on every corner. Sources estimate there were, 20,000 in Chicago by 1928?
At least. And at least 29 breweries operated openly in Chicago alone, just paying off city officials not to notice.
I love the detail about sacramental wine.
In Prohibition's first year, sales of sacramental wine, the only type allowed, increased by 800,000 gallons nationally. A completely transparent farce.
Which means the sheer scale of the graft required to maintain this system must have been staggering.
It was the central business expense. Dion O'Banion, the bootlegger and florist, he calculated it perfectly. He said, there's $30 million worth of beer sold in Chicago every month, and $1 million a month is spread among police, politicians, and federal agents to keep it flowing.
$1 million a month just in graft. That tells you everything you need to know about the political fix being central to their business model from day one.
Precisely. You needed that network of official corruption simply to operate. And that's why another bootlegger, Roger Tuffy, could write that there wasn't any stigma to selling beer. It was viewed as a great public service by many.
Yeah, everyone was in on it.
Clergymen, bankers, senators, everyone drank their beer. Prohibition didn't dry up the country. It merely nationalized a lucrative criminal enterprise and turned a whole class of businessmen into hardened criminals overnight.
And that transition from protected local vice to industrial-scale crime and political fixing, it really started with Jim Colosimo.
It did. Big Jim Colosimo is the first great success story of the Italian mob integrating with the established Irish political machine. He rose from working for $2 a day as a white wing, literally shoveling horse muck off the city streets, to powerful union leadership.
But his critical maneuver was getting adopted by the Irish politicians, Kenna and Coughlin.
That was the foundational turning point. Kenna and Coughlin, the dominant Irish political bosses, they desperately needed the rapidly expanding Italian ghetto vote and saw Colosimo as their ticket.
So by adopting the first Italian-American into their deeply entrenched City Hall corruption network, they made him a protected Democratic precinct captain.
And that official immunity was priceless. In his new role as graft collector for what they called the Trust, the formalized graft collection system run by the Irish politicians, he met Victoria Moresco, a premier madam who was twice his age.
And that marital relationship became a massive business partnership.
A huge one. By 1912, they owned over 200 brothels, netting $600,000 annually, which was a vast fortune. The trust became so powerful that politicians no longer simply collected graft. They had to court the trust.
But Colosimo was old school. He was a vice baron, focused on prostitution, gambling, extortion.
He was. His New York cousin Johnny Torrio had a far grander, much more modern corporate vision.
Right. Torrio saw that $600,000 annual take as just a foundation, a stepping stone to something limitless.
Exactly. Torrio viewed the vice business as a foundation for a limitless crime empire built on alliances and cartels. He set up his headquarters in the Four Deuces at 2222 South Wabash, installing gambling dens and a brothel on the top floor.
And even before Prohibition hit full force, Torrio was grossing over $4 million a year.
His genius lay in brokering those alliances, displaying the brilliant foresight that would define the outfit's longevity.
And to professionalize the muscle and security needed for this expansion, Torrio imported a fiercely loyal enforcer from Brooklyn.
Alphonse Capone. He was brought in shortly before Big Jim's murder. While it was never proven, a witness to Colosimo's demise described the fleeing assailant as a heavy-set man with scars on the left side of his face.
A description that pretty much narrowed the field directly to Capone.
It did. Torrio taught Capone his mantra, bribe everyone but shoot faster. Capone was the indispensable muscle, but Torrio was the brain who secured crucial alliances with key powerhouses like the Genna family and the Union Siciliana.
The Union Siciliana being the official governing body for Italian-American crime in Chicago.
Correct. But the hyper-volatility of the Prohibition era meant those alliances were constantly tested, especially by rival gangs, like the notorious North Side mobster, Dion O'Banion.
O'Banion, the murdering florist.
Yeah.
He despised Torrio's vice trade right. He saw it as beneath him.
Absolutely. While he ran his own breweries and distilleries, he preferred to just hijack Torrio Genna liquor shipments, a constant source of friction. He famously pilfered thousands of gallons of Capone's best alcohol, once leaving a humorous, though dangerous calling card by replacing the booze with water.
So the Gennas wanted him dead.
They were spoiling for a fight, but Torrio, the pragmatist, tried desperately to mediate.
O'Banion sealed his own fate, though, not through hijacking, but with that infamous double cross.
It was a masterpiece of treachery and disrespect. In 1924, O'Banion convinces Torrio to buy his share of the Sebin Brewery for $500,000.
And Torrio, looking for peace, agrees.
He agrees to attend the final loadout on May 19th. As the beer trucks are filling up, O'Banion immediately tips off the police. Torrio is arrested for Volstead violations, and O'Banion is seen whistling, looking, as one source put it, like the cat that had eaten the canary.
That calculated action guaranteed the consensus among the Union leadership that he had to go.
You could never trust him again. He had to go.
So once Torrio stepped back after O'Banion was killed, Capone, now fully aware of the absolute power of political protection, sets his sights on Chicago's City Hall.
He was relentless. He backed the corrupt, laissez-faire politician William Big Bill Thompson for mayor, spending an estimated $250,000 on his campaign.
And more alarmingly, he used about 1,000 thugs on Election Day.
The contest was so violent, Capone's sluggers heaved so many grenades into polling places, that the event was universally nicknamed the Pineapple Primary.
Pineapple for the shape of the grenades.
Exactly. Thompson, short on intellect but long on obedience, was really just a front, giving Capone and his syndicate free rein.
Yet he also tried to ingratiate himself with the opposition, the Chicago Crime Commission, which is just an astonishing display of chutzpah.
It's a perfect example of his audacious grasp of the political fix. He met with the CCC president, a 76-year-old named Frank J. Loesch, at the Lexington Hotel. He's sitting there below portraits of Washington, Lincoln, and Mayor Compson.
And Loesch asks Capone to keep the thugs away from the polls in an upcoming election.
And Capone's response becomes legendary. He says, "I'll have the cops send over the squad cars the night before the election and jug all the hoodlums and keep them in the cooler until the polls close."
And Loesch, the head of the Crime Commission, called that the squarest and most successful election in 40 years.
Because Capone delivered.
Yeah.
He demonstrated that his control over both the police force and the criminal element was absolute. But after the bloody St. Valentine's Day massacre in 1929, the political heat became immense.
Even for Capone.
Even for him. Johnny Torrio, the brilliant fox, advised him the safest place in the world is inside a jail.
So Capone engineered his own arrest to deflect the heat. How did that work?
With remarkable ease. He arranged a prearranged collar with 2 Philadelphia cops he knew socially, tipping them $20,000 to arrest him for the minor charge of carrying a concealed weapon.
And he served a year with unimaginable privilege.
Carpets, a phone for limitless long-distance calls at the state's expense, a radio, conjugal visits. The goal was simple: get off the front pages and wait for the heat to die down.
But he also launched his Robin Hood phase, the ultimate contradiction.
It was a masterfully calculated PR move. He created soup kitchens in Chicago, feeding some 10,000 people a day, handing out money to the needy during the onset of the Great Depression.
This was partly to sway public opinion and partly to sway potential jury pools as his legal troubles mounted.
Yes, he presented himself as a victim of persecution, but the authorities finally got him not for murder, but for tax evasion.
Correct. The federal government realized they couldn't nail him for murder, but the IRS saw the enormous untaxed profits. He was eventually convicted, receiving unprecedented punishment for the crime. A $50,000 fine, $30,000 in court costs, and 11 years in prison.
And what's widely believed by many Chicago insiders is that he was ultimately set up by his own men, Frank Nitti, Paul Ricca, Luis Campagna.
They feared his reckless, high-profile style was bad for the long-term viability of the enterprise.
Absolutely. Ricca allegedly said Al was bad for business and it was better that he left the scene. There are strong suggestions in the source material that Capone's lieutenants may have even tipped the feds to the crucial financial records that sealed his fate,
ensuring the organization could continue without the unwanted attention Capone generated. They forced the transition to a more sophisticated model,
which sets the stage perfectly for the massive shift in culture, from warlord chaos to corporate brain trust. When Capone went away, his heirs realized that visibility was weakness, and specialization and silence were strength.
And they officially changed their name to the Outfit.
That's the key distinction. They intentionally positioned the new titular boss, a 42-year-old Frank Nitti, as the lightning rod, the figurehead. This was a deliberate strategy. The boss is the decoy, drawing the flack away from the real board of directors.
And most of these men were barely 30 years old when Capone was incarcerated, but they had a profound vision for structure and stability.
They did?
So who comprised this brain trust, this new generation of power that ensured the Outfit's longevity?
The core consisted of three exceptional figures, each specializing in a crucial area. First, Joe Accardo, or Joe Batters. He was famously said he has more brains for breakfast than Al Capone ever had all day.
He earned Capone's trust after physically shielding him from an assassination attempt.
Right, which led to his elevation. Accardo was known for fierce loyalty, being a doting father, and trying, unsuccessfully, to go by JB for the country club set, though Joe stuck. He oversaw the massive gambling operations and became the ultimate survivor.
Then there was the highly intelligent, soft-spoken emissary, the diplomat of the organization.
That was Paul Ricca, or the Waiter, a nickname he despised but couldn't shake.
Good.
He cultivated a soft-spoken, well-mannered businessman persona. Capone appointed him his personal emissary to other syndicates, and crucially, the liaison to Torrio's newly established National Commission.
His intellect made him indispensable for high-level negotiations.
And finally, the ultimate strategist and the man responsible for the biggest financial leap, Murray the Camel Humphreys.
Humphreys was the Einstein of crime.
He focused relentlessly on synthesis and long-term viability. He was the organization's primary strategist, and he was responsible for transforming the outfit's financial base away from the volatile, unreliable product of booze.
He recognized that prohibition was a finite resource.
Exactly, destined to end by public outcry. His revelation was profound. Labor unions offered a path to combine extravagant, low-risk wealth with an air of respectability in the upper world.
So labor racketeering wasn't just another scheme, it was literally the next evolution, the new booze, with better long-term prospects.
It was the next logical corporate step. Humphrey started early, proving the concept. In 1922, he tried to ally milk drivers and janitors' unions. He quickly moved to extorting high-rise dwellers by convincing elevator operators to strike.
His proposal is simple. No pay. You walk up and down 20 floors every day.
And when the dwellers were desperate enough, Humphreys would step in, settle the dispute, and collect his consulting fee from management. He established a permanent extortion mechanism.
And he used legitimate business ownership to learn the mechanisms of the industry he planned to take over.
Exactly. Humphreys wasn't just a thug demanding tribute. He owned laundries and dry cleaning businesses like Drexel and Boulevard, which allowed him to learn the costs, logistics, and union vulnerabilities from the inside.
That dual role gave him leverage over both employers and workers.
Right. And interestingly, this is where the joke that allegedly coined the term laundering money originated. a casual pun by one of his associates, Curly, about hiding cash at his laundry.
And the political fix was so absolute in Chicago that even when these operations were uncovered, the outfit's men walked free.
The master cleaners trial is the perfect example. Humphrey's union associates were arrested, and they were defended by the legendary Clarence Darrow. Despite a mountain of incriminating evidence and Darrow's curiously anemic presentation, the jury acquitted them in 15 minutes.
Because the fix was in.
The fix was in. The union later called Capone for protection during a bitter labor dispute, and he did it well, proving the model's effectiveness. The message was clear. If the outfit controlled the union, they controlled the industry, and they controlled the courts.
And it was Humphreys who convinced Capone to get into the milk racket, even though Capone seemed uninterested in anything but booze.
Humphrey's argument was compelling. Milk offered a bigger, safer markup than alcohol, so Capone, seeing the long-term stability, started extolling its virtues.
You got to have a product that everybody needs every day.
Unlike booze, milk was a daily necessity.
And that shift toward necessity-based racketeering shows the outfit's strategic move towards stable, daily, upper-world revenue streams money that would keep flowing long after Prohibition ended.
As the Chicago outfit established its domestic brain trust and shifted its focus to labor, Johnny Torrio was executing his much broader national vision.
Right. After surviving Capone's reckless era, Torrio relocated to New York and called a monumental summit with the new generation of national leaders, Meyer Lansky, Ben Siegel, and Lucky Luciano. And this meeting essentially formalized the birth of the National Commission, the prophetic outline of the 20th century American underworld.
That's what's so fascinating. Torrio, the ultimate pragmatist, he wanted to pool resources and eliminate wasteful internal warfare, which he knew drew unwanted federal attention.
He proposed open cities.
And one big combination where, crucially, each guy keeps what he's got now. We work as equal partners. He envisioned a mixture of the legitimate and the criminal as their strongest card.
And the New York contingent grasped the concept immediately.
They realized it would cut vast amounts of fat from the bundle and force politicians to deal with a united front.
While Torrio created the national governance structure, the outfit's operational genius, Murray Humphreys, identified the first major target for national expansion outside Chicago, Hollywood.
They identified film industry unions, specifically the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IAT, as a prime target. Immense cash flow, and the studio system was very vulnerable.
The entry point was Johnny Rosselli, the all-American mafioso.
Rosselli was suave, loved high style, and he became the ultimate insider, exploiting Hollywood's existing affinity for colorful characters and fixers.
His initial role was subtle bookmaker and personal advisor to studio heads like Joe Schenck and Harry Cohn, which gave him vital intelligence.
And when the Depression hit, studio employees faced staggering 50% wage cuts. When the largest union, IAT, struck in 1933, the studio heads didn't call the police.
They called Rosselli to break the strike.
He imported local toughs, armed with what Chicagoans called Chicago typewriters, Thompson submachine guns, and the bitter strike was ended in one ugly week. Rosselli was put on the permanent payroll.
And they then seized control of IATs from the inside, essentially making it a mob asset.
They installed George Brown as the puppet president, though the real work was handled by an uneducated pimp and outfit associate named Willie Byoff.
And Brown and Byoff were quickly directed to New York to meet the National Commission, solidifying the network's national reach.
Their new assignment was simple and brilliant: monetize the union members directly. They levied a secret 2% surcharge on all IADC members' paychecks for a fictional strike insurance fund.
They argued this insurance would keep the mob out of the studios, even though the mob was the insurance.
Simultaneously, Byoff appointed himself the purchasing agent for DuPont film stock, taking a massive 7% commission for doing absolutely no work.
And all the while, workers' wages declined 15 to 40% over 4 years.
While Byoff and Brown skimmed millions and imported armed Chicago slubbers to break any rival strikes.
The ultimate illustration of the outfit merging the upper world and underworld is the rise of their indispensable lawyer, Sidney Korshak.
Korshak was recruited by the outfit referred to in code as Mr. Lincoln by Humphreys because of his political connections. He never practiced law in California in the traditional courtroom sense. His task was to be the supreme fixer
For the outfit and the National Commission.
With mob-controlled unions and talent agencies holding the studios hostage, Korshak became absolutely indispensable, mediating deals that kept the studios operating. His power was immense, and it set the trend that exists to this day. The entertainment business in Hollywood is virtually run by powerful, politically connected attorneys.
Let's talk about the political entanglement that reached the highest office, starting with the Truman administration.
The outfit's influence was heavily embedded in the Democratic Party machine, particularly through Kansas City machine boss Tom Pendergast, who sponsored the political ascendancy of future President Harry S. Truman.
Our sources note that even earlier, 1932, the mob was influential in Roosevelt's election.
Lucky Luciano recalled that his faction required a specific concession. Roosevelt had to taper off the high-profile Seabury civic corruption investigation in New York. Luciano claimed when Frank Costello got the word that Roosevelt would kill the investigation, it was in the bag for him.
And Mooney Giancana allegedly boasted that Roosevelt got to the White House thanks to syndicate money. That's a monumental claim.
It speaks to their self-perception of power. And the claims are supported by other disturbing connections, like the relationship between FDR advisor and powerful labor leader Sidney Hillman and Commission kingpin Lepke Buchalter, the head of Murder, Inc.
Hillman used Lipke for muscle and murder,
paying him $350 per week plus massive $25,000 bonuses for strike breaking, all to fortify his amalgamated clothing workers union. Lepke was literally being paid to be the physical enforcement arm of a major national union.
He was eventually executed, but not before detailing the arrangement.
Right. And the outfit knew that Truman, indebted to Pendergast, was someone they could manipulate when they needed federal intervention. This comes to a head with the infamous Rika parole scandal in 1947.
A case that seems unbelievable in its corruption.
This case perfectly demonstrates the power they wielded at the federal level. Rika and his cohorts were imprisoned, and their demand for an early parole was, on paper, virtually inconceivable.
Given their history and outstanding fraud charges.
But the outfit did not allow bureaucracy to stop their business. Accardo and Humphreys, taking turns impersonating the attorney Joseph Bolger, held covert business meetings inside the high-security lockup at Leavenworth.
They turned a federal penitentiary into their meeting room.
To secure the parole, they hired Dallas attorney John J. Hughes for an extravagant $15,000 fee plus expenses. Hughes was specifically chosen as an insurance policy because of his high-level connections to President Truman and Attorney General Tom Clark.
And the result was astonishing. The fraud charges were dropped, and the parole was granted.
Allegedly ordered by Attorney General Tom Clark, the same man who had previously scuttled an FBI vote fraud investigation that hurt Truman's opponents. It's a chain of highly suspicious coincidences.
On top of that, Humphreys miraculously negotiated Rika's and Campagna's $600,000 in back taxes and penalties down to a paltry $126,000.
This kind of financial maneuvering requires absolute power in high places. Street hoods, watching this, claimed openly that the money for the parole deal went into the White House and the Attorney General's office.
So the outfit was moving into the upper world, financially, politically, and geographically. That brings us to their prescience regarding legalized gambling in the desert Las Vegas.
The outfit had their eyes on Nevada early. They were planning for the future after Prohibition. Legalized gambling in 1931 coincided perfectly with the construction of the Hoover Dam, which brought an influx of 5,000 well-paid workers.
It was the next logical step, what they called the new booze, a perfectly legal, state-sanctioned way to monetize vice.
And the outfit was quick to dip into its treasury to persuade any state house holdouts to expand the legalization of gambling across the state.
Bugsy Siegel became the flamboyant, but ultimately reckless, face of their Las Vegas ambitions with the Flamingo.
Siegel was ordered to L.A. by Luciano and Lansky, and he leveraged the commission's powerful backing to build the Flamingo in 1946. But his flair for extravagance led to massive cost overruns. The budget ballooned from $1.5 million to $6 million.
And the commission staked him an extra $5 million, but they grew convinced he and his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, were skimming.
Skimming money into Swiss bank accounts, yes. Hill was ostensibly the gang's courier, but also a known spy.
And Siegel's extravagance, combined with some monumentally bad decisions, led directly to his demise.
His time was running out. He beat Virginia Hill savagely, which was the straw that broke the camel's back for his backers. You don't damage the person handling the cash flow.
And more fatally, he unwisely tried to extort Joe Accardo for $2 million to relinquish control of the Transamerica wire service.
An act of brazen disrespect that sealed his fate. The outfit and the commission swiftly ordered his killing, executed in a hail of gunfire while he was reading the paper in Hill's home.
After World War II, they branched out internationally too, anticipating the need for offshore revenue. specifically in Cuba.
Johnny Rosselli expanded into Cuba, partnering directly with dictator Fulgencio Batista and Meyer Lansky, who was put in charge of gambling reform. Lansky took a $25,000 retainer and, as the sources note, untold millions below the table in skimmed profits.
His money-counting crew had a mantra.
3 for us, 1 for the government, and 2 for Meyer. Accardo and Giancana also invested heavily in shrimp boats and sugar export, making Cuba a lucrative new front, until Fidel Castro seized it all in 1959.
But their most critical, strategic, and lasting financial move back home was in Chicago with the control of the Teamsters Union. This was the masterstroke of Humphrey's 5-year plan.
This was the culmination of the Brain Trust strategy. The key was the Teamsters Central States Pension Fund. Former Capone associate Red Dorfman suggested that if the outfit controlled Teamster locals backed Jimmy Hoffa for president, Hoffa would, in turn, open the multi-billion-dollar fund vaults for low-interest outfit loans.
This was perfectly timed to counter the pressure they were facing in Las Vegas.
Absolutely. By 1957, the Mormon-controlled Las Vegas banks had finally cracked down on providing loans to known gangsters. The Teamsters Fund solved this immediately. The outfit had preferred borrower status from this enormous, almost limitless fund.
And they made sure Hoffa got the job.
In August 1957, the LA police witnessed Humphreys, Marshall Caifano, and Ralph Pierce meeting with the Teamsters Executive Board. Their purpose was unmistakable: to advise members of the executive board in no uncertain terms that Hoffa is to be the next president.
They didn't just invest in Hoffa, they installed him, and in doing so, created their own private, virtually unregulated bank.
Which leads us to the pinnacle of their political involvement. The alleged fix of the 1960 presidential election, arguably the most important political event they ever orchestrated.
The sources detail monumental involvement in electing John F. Kennedy. The Kennedy patriarch, Joe Kennedy, was already well known to the underworld from the Volstead era.
He'd allegedly engaged in double crosses and liquor theft from bootleggers, giving him a long history with men who lived outside the law.
In 1960, Joe Kennedy held a summit with the outfit leadership, Accardo, Giancana, Humphreys, and Rosselli, to secure their operational support for his son, Jack.
And what was this specific non-negotiable deal that was struck?
Mooney Giancana later bragged that Joe Kennedy promised his boys would back off the outfit, especially in Las Vegas, where federal heat was rising relentlessly under Bobby Kennedy.
The outfit leadership took a highly informal 3-man vote on the deal. Accardo and Giancana voted for it, convinced by the promise of immunity, but Humphreys voted vehemently against it.
He called Joe Kennedy an untrustworthy four-flusher.
Meaning he was a bluffer, a man who couldn't be trusted. But the fix was executed nonetheless, largely coordinated by Humphreys himself, even though he had officially retired and voted against the deal.
He was loyal to the organization's corporate structure.
He went on the lam to Key Biscayne, Florida, staying in a rented home under the alias Mr. Lewis Hart, calling the election fix the most important work I'll ever do. The results were decisive.
In states where the outfit had a strong union presence, Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, Nevada, Kennedy squeaked to gossamer-thin victories, accounting for a crucial 63 electoral votes.
And Mayor Daley's role in Chicago was legendary, delivering the critical state of Illinois.
Daley was the ultimate political machine operative. He withheld the Cook County vote totals until the very end, waiting to see precisely how many votes he would need.
And he delivered a stunning majority of 456,312 votes, achieving a staggering 89.3% turnout, which famously included the eligible deceased.
Daley, when later asked about the stealing, just confessed he did it to offset the Republican stealing downstate.
Jean Humphreys, Curley's wife, later reflected on it. I didn't know that a president could be elected on the whim of Chicago mobsters.
The outfit's immense power, solidified by the 1960 election, quickly led to one of the most bizarre and surreal partnerships in U.S. history, the CIA's Operation Mongoose.
A plan to assassinate Fidel Castro. It sounds like a fictional plot. The arch-patriots of the outfit teaming up with the CIA because Castro has seized their Cuban casinos.
But it was absolutely true. The CIA operative, Bob Mayhew, contacted Johnny Rosselli, playing the Hitler card, arguing Castro was a communist threat. Rosselli agreed to help his beloved country gratis.
He hated losing his Cuban empire. But Rosselli, already paranoid about FBI surveillance, needed ironclad proof it was government approved, even if they would later deny it.
And Rosselli brought Giancana and the Florida boss, Centro Trafficante, into the fold because of their deep Havana contacts.
Trafficante, nicknamed Joe the Courier, was perfect for the job. The CIA provided extremely potent poison pills intended to be slipped into Castro's drink or food.
And Mooney Giancana, always indiscreet, later bragged to an FBI informant that Castro would be done away with before the November election.
But Trafficante later admitted that he simply flushed the pills down the toilet after one failed attempt, concluding that, despite all the planning, nothing ever came of it.
Meanwhile, Humphreys, even while dealing with the CIA, was still paranoid about FBI surveillance, leading to some high-level mind games.
That's classic Humphreys. He was highly paranoid because of the wiretaps, particularly the little owl microphone the FBI had illegally planted in their social haunts. At one point, he had his wife, Jean, stage a conversation with Rosselli about the plural of mongoose in a tapped hotel room.
The entire conversation was a farce, rehearsed beforehand.
Designed solely to drive the G-men crazy by making them believe the outfit was talking about the classified CIA plot using code words.
Despite these high-stakes operations, the outfit was fracturing internally, specifically between Accardo, the quiet strategist, and Giancana, the increasingly public figure.
The feud escalated rapidly, fueled by Giancana's indiscretion. J. Edgar Hoover was using those illegally planted bugs to listen in on Giancana's every word. Hoover heard Giancana complaining bitterly about the double-cross in the Kennedy deal.
And Hoover used these private complaints as political ammunition to torture Bobby Kennedy.
The Vegas losses cemented Mooney's fury. After Frank Sinatra, under immense pressure from the Kennedys, shut down their joint venture at the Cal Naval Lodge in 1963, Mooney was furious. He put out a contract on Sinatra,
which was called off only after New York mobsters interceded.
Right. Giancana's constant front-page grabbing style and his indiscretion proved too costly for the sophisticated board, whose primary value was silence,
which led to his exile and infamous brutal death.
In 1966, Accardo and Rica decisively removed Giancana from leadership and exiled him to Mexico. When he finally returned in 1975, he was executed in his basement kitchen while preparing a modest meal of sausage, escargot, and sushi beans.
He was shot 7 times with a silencer-equipped .22 execution style.
Once in the back of the head, once in the mouth, and 5 times under the chin. His escape insurance, a velvet bag full of diamonds and jewels, was missing, suggesting the hit was highly professional and possibly internal.
Through all this bloodshed and transition, Joe Accardo, Joe Batters, remained the ultimate survivor and the architect of the outfit's modern structure.
Accardo and Rica were the final links to Capone, constantly working to legitimize or divest their holdings. The Caesars Palace Casino Skim, a critical outfit operation, was leaked to the press via illegal FBI bug reports before the casino even opened in 1966.
And Accardo responded brilliantly.
He strategically sold off the outfit's casino holdings to squeaky clean suckers, while crucially retaining management rights and the skimming operations. The most famous buyer was Howard Hughes, the eccentric billionaire cook who moved into the Desert Inn penthouse and refused to leave,
perfectly shielding the operations from scrutiny.
And their control over the upper world became so entrenched it extended far beyond Las Vegas, even into high-level Hollywood casting calls.
Right, with the production of The Godfather. Paramount producer Robert Evans desperately needed Al Pacino for the lead role, but Pacino was tied up in an unbreakable contract with MGM.
Evans, frustrated, called Sidney Korshak the outfit's primary legal fixer. Evans describes Korshak's minimal verbal response, just a string of yes, before he called back a mere 20 minutes later.
And Korshak, using his immense power over studio heads, secured Pacino's immediate release,
proving his indispensable power in Hollywood's legal and business affairs, right up to the highest levels of entertainment.
So what does this all mean for the outfit today? What is the enduring legacy of this sophisticated structure the Brain Trust created?
Well, the outfit eventually contracted in size. The current structure is often referred to as mob-light. They operate with a smaller core, perhaps 50 members, focused intensely on low-profile, sophisticated ventures.
They still mine the traditional sources of treasure, gambling and union kickbacks,
primarily from enormous treasuries like the $1.5 billion Laborers International Union of North America Fund, which just dwarfs their old Prohibition earnings.
And they've adopted a remarkable discipline, consciously avoiding the volatility that doomed Capone and Giancana.
The outfit strictly avoids street-level drug trafficking and large-scale violence. The The penalty for non-payment is often simple blacklisting or economic exclusion, not physical harm. They learn the crucial lesson that when victims willingly participate in gambling and there are no bodies or blood, it draws much less attention.
The operation is now remarkably sophisticated and often impossible to trace.
Focus primarily on white-collar fraud and exploiting union treasuries. This transition, ironically, seems to fulfill the long-term goal of the original brain trust legitimacy and quiet wealth.
It absolutely does. The sacrosanct Italian dictate that the next generation must improve upon the previous one came true. The children of the bosses largely fulfilled their parents' desire for upper-world acceptance.
Becoming highly successful realtors, stockbrokers, and attorneys, investing the trust their fathers established in fully legitimate businesses, and leveraging their inherited connections. They became what the brain trust always wanted: wealthy, silent, and accepted.
So let's recap the aha moments from this deep dive. We've traced the history from the physical underworld of Chicago, named for a foul onion, and the fierce discrimination faced by immigrants to the creation of the National Commission.
The core insight is understanding the outfit as an organization that successfully exploited massive institutional failures and hypocrisies. Prohibition was the sudden catalyst, providing the initial capital.
And labor racketeering, championed by Humphreys, became the enduring financial successor to booze, providing wealth, institutional power, and a thin veneer of respectability.
And the outfit's shocking influence on national politics. From the Attorney General securing the RICA paroles to the sophisticated coordination of the 1960 presidential election shows just how deeply they managed to integrate their operation into the American power structure.
Realizing that the fix was simply another business expense.
The lasting and perhaps most disturbing truth revealed in these sources is the contrast in the standards of justice. Underworld figures like Capone and Annenberg faced the full, brutal weight of the IRS and the law.
Yet, many sources highlight how white-collar criminals, from bankers laundering cartel money to tobacco executives selling carcinogens and Ford executives knowingly selling deadly pintos, are granted virtual carte blanche or minor fines.
The source material notes that the only difference between the upper-world gangsters and the underworld variety was that the lower-class criminals had guts to spare.
So given the complete triumph of this disciplined strategic model in the form of mob-light, what does this history imply for us today?
The rise of the outfit was always predicated on their ability to exploit hypocrisy and integrate into the upper-world power vacuum, understanding that violence only attracts attention, while silent financial control grants lasting influence.
So if the mob light has now mastered operating entirely without violence and without public complaint, focused solely on sophisticated control of legitimate industries and billion-dollar union treasuries, this raises a pretty important question you need to mull over.
Is their current low-profile operation a sign of law enforcement failure to track nonviolent, sophisticated crime, or is it, perhaps, the quiet, ultimate triumph of the outfit's original corporate strategy?